prenup was 32 pages. Isabella had read every word twice, her eyes tracing the cold legal language, while her father paced the mahogany-paneled conference room like a caged animal. Irrevocable separation of assets, no claim to inheritance, marriage dissolution eligible after 18 months. It was insulting in its clarity. Adrian Voss wanted her body and her name, nothing more. "You don't have to do this," her father whispered, though they both knew that was a lie. 3 months of missed payroll, investors jumping ship. The documentary production company Bella had built with her father for 15 years was collapsing, and Adrian Voss had dangled salvation like bait. Bella set down the prenup. "What's the actual play here? Why would a man like him marry someone like me?" Her father's jaw tightened. He didn't know. No one did. Adrian's reasons were sealed behind that impossible face and controlled demeanor she'd only glimpsed once at the charity gala where he'd made his proposal. Not a romantic gesture, a business transaction delivered with champagne flute in hand and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Marry me, I'll save your company." Just like that. Now, sitting in the glass-walled Voss Holdings office on the 48th floor, with the city sprawling beneath them like a kingdom of concrete and ambition, Bella signed her name. Isabella Cortez, soon to be Isabella Voss. The pen felt like a weight in her hand. "It's done," Adrian said from behind her. She hadn't heard him enter a skill he'd perfected, moving through spaces like smoke. He was in his charcoal suit, tie the color of storm clouds, cufflinks catching the afternoon light. Everything about him was expensive and controlled. Everything about him made her skin feel too tight. "In 48 hours we marry. Civil ceremony, your family, mine, necessary witnesses." His voice was measured, like he was discussing quarterly earnings. "Then we appear at the Pemberton Gala on Friday. You'll wear something that announces you're mine." The possessiveness should have repulsed her. Instead, something in her chest twisted. And then, Bella stood, facing him. He was tall enough that she had to tilt her head back, and she hated that disadvantage. "Do I move into your penthouse and play the role while you conduct your business?" "Yes." Adrian stepped closer. Not touching, he never did, but close enough that she could smell his cologne, something dark and earthy, close enough that she was acutely aware of every point of space between them. "You'll be my wife in every way that matters publicly. Privately, we maintain civility. You have your space, I have mine." "How long?" she asked quietly. "Long enough." Those pale gray eyes, unsettling in their clarity, held hers. 18 months. Then we dissolve quietly. You keep the settlement. Your father's company stabilizes. Everyone benefits. Except, Bella thought but didn't say, my ability to trust that I can fall in love without wondering if it's a transaction. "I have one condition," she said, and watched his eyebrow arch slightly. Adrian Voss wasn't accustomed to conditions. No infidelity clause in the public story. If anyone asks, we're married. That's all anyone needs to know. I'm not going to lie about loving you. I'm just not going to claim it. Something flickered across his face, so fast she nearly missed it. A crack, maybe, or shadow. "Agreed," he said. "I'll send a car tomorrow at noon. Bring what you need for the weekend." The penthouse was obscene. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed 3 sides. The living space flowed into itself. Kitchen, dining, lounge, all pale marble and dark wood. Modern art on walls that probably cost more than Bella's parents' house. Everything was perfect in the way that said a professional decorator had been paid to make it that way. Cold, curated, empty of personality. "Your suite is through here," Adrian said, leading her down a hallway lined with photographs she realized were his cities at night. Architectural shots, one striking image of a storm rolling over mountains. So he had an inner life. He just chose not to share it. The bedroom was pale, gray, silk, and soft lighting, with an adjoining bathroom that had more amenities than most apartments. A walk-in closet already held clothes in her size. Shoes, dresses, casual wear, all chosen by his staff, she assumed. All impersonal. "Everything you need," Adrian said quietly, standing in the doorway. "If you require anything else, there's an intercom. Staff lives on the lower level." Bella ran her hand across one of the dresses, cream silk. Expensive, generic. "When do we pretend to be happy?" "Friday," he said. "At the Pemberton Gala. We're required to attend, and the society pages will be watching. Until then, you can settle." She turned to face him. "Don't I get to settle in with you? A wedding night, at least for appearance's sake." His expression didn't change, but something in his shoulders stiffened. "Is that what you want?" No, Bella thought. Yes, I don't know. I want this to be convincing, she said instead. Adrian was quiet for a moment. Then, we'll share the master suite, separate sleeping areas. When we need to be visible as a couple, we will be. He left before she could respond, closing the door with a quiet click that sounded like a judge's gavel. The wedding was small and surgical. Bella wore white silk that cost more than her first car. Adrian wore charcoal and looked at her once, a long assessment that made her breath catch before they stood before the judge. Her father cried quietly. Adrian's mother, elegant and icy, examined Bella with the expression of someone inspecting a piece of jewelry they'd already decided not to like. You may kiss the bride, the judge said, and the moment crystallized. Adrian turned to her, close. His hand found her waist the first time he'd touched her with intention, and Bella's entire body went still. Every nerve ending locked on that single point of contact. She could feel the warmth of his palm through the silk. He kissed her, and it was nothing like she expected. It wasn't possessive or performance. It was gentle, testing. His lips brushed hers like he was memorizing something essential, and when he pulled back, his eyes were unreadable. Let's go home, he said quietly. For a moment, she thought she heard something underneath the words. Some truth he wasn't saying, but then he released her, stepped back, and the moment shattered. The Pemberton Gala was a study in excess. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls. A string quartet played in one corner while 200 of the city's elite circulated in jewels and tailored fabric. Bella clung to a glass of champagne and felt like a fraud in borrowed elegance. Adrian appeared at her elbow, always appearing, never arriving. He was polished and dangerous in his tuxedo, and when he rested his hand on the small of her back, she understood he was about to perform. They moved through the room as a unit. Adrian introduced her as his wife with a possessiveness that made people's eyebrows arch. He held her hand just tight enough to suggest devotion. When she spoke, he listened like her words mattered. It was convincing enough to fool everyone watching, but midway through the evening, when they danced and his hand slid from her waist to the bare skin of her lower back, Bella realized something that terrified her. She couldn't tell anymore where the performance ended and something real began. You're thinking too loudly, Adrian murmured, his lips near her ear. I can feel it. How? She whispered. I'm paying attention, he said simply. I always have been. And before she could ask what that meant, the music changed, and he pulled her closer. And for one suspended moment, Bella forgot they were supposed to be pretending. The penthouse revealed itself in pieces over the next week. Bella discovered Adrian took his coffee at 5 a.m., black, 2 shots of espresso. She learned his morning routine involved 40 minutes of running on the rooftop before anyone else woke. She'd seen him through the gym glass, shirt soaked, pushing himself like he was punishing something. She noticed he always left his home office door slightly ajar, a detail she suspected was intentional, like he wanted to know when she was moving through the space. What she didn't discover was anything that would explain why he'd married her. You're beautiful when you're angry, Adrian said on Thursday, leaning against the kitchen counter where Bella was aggressively preparing lunch. She hadn't asked him to make it. She'd wanted something to do with her hands that wasn't thinking about him. I'm not angry, she lied. Your jaw clenches. Left side, slightly higher than your right. He was entirely too observant. It's happened 17 times since Monday. Bella slammed the cutting board down. How is that your business? It's not, Adrian acknowledged. But I'm noticing anyway. That's the difference between transaction and attention, Bella. The way he said her name like it tasted of something he wanted made her stomach flip. Don't do that, she said. What? That thing where you're intimate without actually being intimate. Where you act like there's something between us when we both know there isn't. Adrian set down his phone. He was in rolled-up shirt sleeves and dress pants, having come from some meeting that had occupied his attention since 6 a.m. His hair was slightly disheveled. He looked almost human. What if there is something between us? He asked quietly. What if that's the only reason I agreed to this arrangement in the first place? Bella's knife went still. Your company needed the alliance with my father's network. That's why I could have bought your father's company outright, Adrian interrupted. Absorbed it, stripped the assets, fired everyone, and moved on. That's how this works in my world, but I didn't. Because you needed me, Bella said, but uncertainty crept into her voice. Yes, Adrian agreed, stepping closer. Just not the way either of us was supposed to. There was a moment crystalline and dangerous where Bella understood she was standing at the edge of something that would change everything. She could step back, return to the safety of the transaction, But Adrian's eyes held hers, and she saw something there that looked like truth. "Your company is stable now," she said instead, pulling away. "You've gotten what you need." "Have I?" His voice was soft. "Because from where I'm standing, I'm just beginning to understand what I actually need, and it involves you, and touch, and the fact that you look at me like I'm a problem to solve instead of a billionaire to envy." Bella's hands trembled as she gripped the counter. Don't pretend this is real because it makes the transaction easier to live with. What if it is real?" Adrian moved until he was inches away, and Bella could feel the heat coming off him. What if it was always real? What if I orchestrated all of this because it was the only way to get close to you, without risking everything I'd spent years controlling? "Then you're lying," Bella whispered. "Because we met at a charity gala. We didn't know each other. You can't build something real on." "I've known your work for 3 years," Adrian said quietly. "Your documentary about labor trafficking in Southeast Asia. Your investigation into corporate exploitation. I've followed your career because you asked questions people were afraid to ask. You challenged power structures. You didn't accept easy answers." Bella felt the ground shift beneath her. "Then my company's crisis was real," Adrian confirmed. "But it was also an opportunity I didn't create but absolutely seized, because you would never have agreed to marry me without leverage. And I needed you to marry me before I exploded from wanting you." "That's not love," Bella said, but her voice shook. "That's obsession." "Maybe," Adrian agreed. "But I'm offering you honesty now. I'm standing here, telling you that every decision I've made in the last 72 hours has been about creating space where you might eventually choose to want this. Want me for reasons beyond survival." Bella's entire body was vibrating. She wanted to leave. She wanted to kiss him. She wanted to scream that this was exactly the kind of manipulation she'd been terrified of. A powerful man using his power to create circumstance. Instead, she said, "Give me time." Something like relief crossed Adrian's face. "Yes, whatever you need." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he brushed a strand of hair from her face with the back of his hand. The touch was barely there, barely anything, but it felt like the most honest thing that had happened between them. "I'll wait," he said. "But I want you to know, however long it takes, I'm not going anywhere." The following week, things shifted. Adrian began leaving notes. Not romantic, that would have been easier to dismiss, but specific. "On the coffee maker, you prefer it at 5:30 a.m., not 6. I adjusted the timer. On the bathroom counter, the spa across the street has a masseuse. I've booked you an appointment on Friday. No one will ask why." On her pillow, "I saw a screening of your latest rough cut. It's extraordinary. You're extraordinary." Bella tried to ignore them, failed spectacularly. She found herself watching for him in the penthouse, waiting to hear the sound of his footsteps. Acutely aware when he was in the next room, as if some internal compass had recalibrated to track his location. One evening, she discovered him in the home office, surrounded by monitors showing market data. She'd meant to simply pass through. Instead, she stopped. "Can't sleep?" she asked. Adrian looked up, and there was exhaustion etched into the lines around his eyes. "Tokyo markets close in an hour. There's a hostile takeover in motion against one of our subsidiary companies. Is it serious?" "Only if we let it be." He ran a hand through his hair. "I have a conference call at 3 a.m. Should be resolved by morning." Bella found herself asking, "Can I stay?" Adrian's expression shifted to something raw and hungry. "Here? In the office," she clarified, though part of her meant more. "I can bring coffee. You can work. I can exist nearby." He looked at her for a long moment. Then, "Yes, please." It was nothing, technically. Bella curled into the leather chair across from his desk, while Adrian took his call. She recognized the assertiveness in his voice, the strategic language, the way he maneuvered through conversation like someone playing chess at speed. He was brilliant, ruthless, absolutely in control. At 4:47 a.m., he hung up. "We won," he said quietly. "The subsidiary is safe." Bella, half asleep, sat up. "Of course we did. She'd said it without thinking. Adrian stood and crossed to where she sat, extended his hand, and pulled her up. For a moment, they were close enough that she could feel his heartbeat, smell the faint cologne and exhaustion on his skin. "Go to sleep," he said, but he didn't release her hand. "I'll be here when you wake up." And somehow, that promise that felt like the most honest thing anyone had ever offered her. The first time Bella saw Adrian actually cry, She almost didn't recognize what was happening. She'd returned early from a meeting with her production company. Her father's health had taken a turn, nothing serious, but enough to require her attention, and found Adrian standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, his shoulders rigid, his hand pressed against the glass. She almost left. Respect for privacy, dignity, the unspoken agreement that they didn't intrude on each other's pain. But then she heard him breathe a sound like something breaking, and she couldn't walk away. "Adrian?" she said quietly. He didn't turn. "My mother called. My father's cancer is back. Aggressive. 6 months, maybe less." The news landed like a stone in still water, ripples of shock spreading outward. Adrian's father, Charles Voss, was a legend in the tech industry, ruthless, brilliant, entirely absent from Adrian's emotional life based on what little he'd shared. But Adrian's shoulders were shaking slightly, and Bella realized she was watching him in full catastrophe. She crossed the room and touched his arm. The muscle beneath her fingers was tense enough to snap. "I'm so sorry," she said, inadequate and honest. "He built an empire," Adrian said, his voice rough, "and I was supposed to exceed it, prove that I was worthy of his DNA, that his investment in being cruel had paid off in my capacity to be ruthless. And I've done that. I've built something that makes his legacy look small." He turned to face her, and his eyes were shattered. "And now he's dying, and all I can think is that I wasted years hating him when I could have been trying to know him." Bella didn't ask permission. She reached up and pulled him down to her, pressing his face against her shoulder while her hand found the back of his neck. She held him as he fell apart quietly, with the kind of restraint that suggested he'd spent most of his life learning not to break. They stood like that for a long time, the city sprawling beneath them, Adrian's breathing gradually settling as her hand moved in slow circles across his back. "I wanted to have all the answers before I let you see this," Adrian said finally, his voice muffled against her shoulder. "I wanted to be the person you needed, not the person who needed you." Bella pulled back, keeping her hands on his shoulders. "I need you," she said, and meant it in a way that terrified her. "Not because of what you can provide or who you are, because you're someone I want to know, and that includes this." Adrian's hand came up and cupped her face with a tenderness that made her throat tight. "I'm afraid," he admitted, "that you'll discover I'm not worth the waiting, that you'll find someone who isn't built on such shaky foundations." "Show me the foundation," Bella said. "Let me decide what it's built on." Adrian's childhood home was on the coast, a sprawling estate that seemed less like a residence and more like a castle designed by someone with unlimited money and no concept of proportion. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Pacific. The grounds were manicured to perfection. Everything about it screamed wealth and isolation. Bella understood, looking at it, why Adrian had learned to control everything. In a place this large, let loose, you'd get lost. Charles Voss was in a room at the east wing, sunlight pouring across a bed that seemed too large for the diminished man lying in it. He was bald from treatment, his skin paper-thin, but his eyes identical to Adrian's. That unsettling gray still held a sharp intelligence. "So this is the girl you married," Charles said, studying Bella with the intensity of someone cataloging her value. "She's beautiful." "That wasn't what I expected." "She's not an acquisition, father," Adrian said quietly, his hand finding Bella's and holding it tight. "She's my wife." Something flickered across Charles's face, perhaps surprise at the distinction, perhaps something that might have been approval. "Tell me about yourself," Charles said to Bella. "Adrian's never brought anyone to this house before. You must be exceptional." Bella made a choice. Standing in that room with 2 Voss men separated by power and genetics, and all the years of distance between them, she chose honesty. "I think Adrian is exceptional," she said. "I think he built himself from ground zero because he learned from watching you that the only way to survive is to be impeccable. And I think he spent so much energy being impeccable that he forgot it was okay to be human." Charles was quiet for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed a dry, rasping sound. "You challenge him. Good. He needs that." Adrian's grip on her hand tightened. Over the next hours, Bella watched Adrian with his father. They didn't erase years of distance, but something shifted. Adrian read to him not business reports, but literature, the kind of thing that required presence rather than productivity. He held his father's hand when the pain medication kicked in, and his eyes grew distant. When Charles fell asleep, Adrian and Bella went out to the terrace, and Adrian kissed her for the first time since that civil ceremony, since that kiss that had tasted like control and hidden wanting. This kiss was different. This was asking. This was vulnerability. This was Adrian giving her access to something he'd sealed away. "I love you," he said when they broke apart. "I've loved you since I watched your documentary and realized that someone in the world cared about truth more than power. I've loved you every day since. I'm not asking you to feel the same. I'm just asking you to know that you are the realest thing I've ever experienced." Bella's heart was racing. She thought about the moment she'd signed the prenup, convinced she was protecting herself. She thought about every night since, realizing that protection and isolation were often the same thing. "I think I'm starting to," she said carefully. "I think I'm starting to fall into you, and it terrifies me because I don't know if it's real or just proximity. And I can't do this if it's not real." "It's real," Adrian said with absolute certainty. "Give me time to prove it." That night, they shared a bed for the first time, not to sleep, but to hold each other, while the man in the next room drifted toward whatever comes after. And Bella realized that love wasn't the absence of risk. Love was choosing to be vulnerable anyway. They scattered Charles's ashes on the Pacific 2 weeks later. He'd held on through 3 more weeks of decline, and then, with Adrian holding his hand, he let go. The funeral was a who's who of Silicon Valley, all standing at attention like soldiers in a battalion of capitalism. But Bella stood to the side, watching Adrian receive condolences with that controlled grace that was his armor. Except the armor was different now. It had cracks. Afterward, Adrian took her to the edge of the cliff, and they stood watching the sun descend toward the horizon. "He told me, the day before he died, that the only thing he regretted was the years he spent trying to be a god instead of a father," Adrian said quietly. "He said he thought he was building something that would make him immortal. And then he looked at you, and he realized immortality was pointless if you had no one to leave it to." Adrian turned to face her. "I don't want to make his mistakes. I don't want to spend my life building empires while missing the actual life happening in front of me." "So what do you want?" Bella asked, though she thought she knew. "I want to dissolve the prenup," Adrian said. "I want to make this real. Legally, emotionally, entirely. I want to wake up next to you every day for the rest of my life. I want to build something with you, not a transaction, not a merger, a life." Bella's eyes filled with tears. She thought about the woman who'd signed a 32-page document convinced she was protecting herself. She thought about the man who'd orchestrated her marriage convinced he was clever enough to force love. And she thought about how both of them had been wrong, and right, and exactly where they needed to be. "Yes," she said, "but I want it on new terms. Not your money, not my father's company, just us." Adrian kissed her as the sun set, and Bella felt something settle in her chest. Not certainty, life was too uncertain for that, but something stronger. Trust. The willingness to be known, the willingness to know him back. 3 months into their real marriage, the press discovered the prenup, not the dissolved version. Adrian's lawyers had kept that quiet, but the original document, somehow leaked to a journalist at the Financial Tribune with a talent for scandal. The headline blazed across morning television: "Billionaire's transactional marriage. Voss admits loveless union." The article was devastating. It detailed Adrian's acquisition of Bella like she was a hostile takeover. It quoted unnamed sources suggesting the marriage was purely strategic, a means to absorb her father's company network. It painted Adrian as the villain and Bella as a victim, which somehow felt worse than being painted as mercenary. Adrian's office was a controlled chaos of damage control when Bella arrived. His PR team surrounded him like a defensive line, talking about statements and counter-narratives while Adrian sat at his desk with the kind of expression that suggested he was running calculations no one else could see. "We need to get ahead of this," his PR director, Jennifer, was saying. "A joint statement about love overcoming initial obstacles. Maybe a magazine spread Vogue, something like that. Show the world your actual relationship." "No," Adrian said flatly. "We don't commodify this. We don't perform for anyone. Sir, your stock price has dropped 3.2% in the last hour." "I don't care." Adrian's voice was sharp enough to cut. "Bella's reputation is being dragged through mud because people think I bought her like a piece of property. We fix that by showing them the truth, not by manufacturing a prettier lie." He looked at Bella, standing in the doorway, and she saw the rage beneath his control. Rage directed at himself, at the systems that had made him believe he could engineer intimacy. "Get everyone out," he said to Jennifer. "Now." The team evacuated with the efficiency of people who'd learned not to argue. When they were alone, Adrian pulled Bella to him, burying his face in her hair. "I'm sorry," he said roughly. "I'm so fucking sorry. I told myself I was being strategic, and I didn't consider what it would do to you when the world found out. The prenup was my father's idea, Bella said quietly. He wanted to protect me from exactly this, the idea that I'd sold myself. And I signed it because I wasn't sure if I could trust my own judgment, because a part of me was afraid you might actually be the villain in this story. Wasn't I? Adrian pulled back enough to look at her. I used your father's financial crisis to force you into marriage. You did, Bella acknowledged. But you also came back and chose to undo it. That matters. The problem was that the prenup leak opened doors Adrian hadn't realized were barricaded. His ex-fiancée, Vanessa, gave an interview to the same journalist. She claimed Adrian had left her abruptly and without explanation to pursue Bella. She suggested obsession, instability, concerning behavior patterns. She made him sound less like a billionaire and more like a stalker who'd finally found his prey. The stock price dropped another 2%. Then Bella's father's company became the subject of regulatory scrutiny. Someone was asking questions about whether Adrian's investment had been designed to cover up financial malfeasance. It was thin, but it was enough to create the narrative that Adrian had orchestrated everything specifically to shield Cortez Industries from investigation. Every thread they pulled seemed to unravel something else. It's Nathaniel Cross, Adrian's security chief told him in a closed-door meeting. One of my primary competitors. He's been funding the leaked information, feeding angles to journalists, orchestrating the regulatory questions. He wants to destabilize me before the Tokyo expansion. Nathaniel Cross was a businessman from the old guard, Adrian's father's generation, who'd been quietly accumulating power while Adrian focused on organic growth. The kind of man who understood that destroying someone's personal reputation was sometimes more effective than destroying their company. The kind of man who saw Bella as Adrian's weakness. He's threatening to release more, Adrian's lawyer said grimly. Detailed financial information about your acquisition of Bella's company stake. Personnel records that show potentially concerning behavior. He's building a case for your removal from board leadership based on emotional instability. Adrian felt Bella's presence without looking at her. She was standing by the window, watching the city, and he could feel her certainty, like a physical thing. I won't hide, she said, turning to face the room. Whatever Nathaniel Cross wants to release about me, about us, we answer it directly. We don't sculpt narratives, we just tell the truth. That truth includes Adrian's obsession, his lawyer said carefully. His following your career. His engineered coincidences. Is that obsession or love? Bella interrupted. Because in this world, apparently, there's a fine line between them. A man pursues a woman relentlessly against her will. Obsession. A man uses his power to engineer a meeting and create circumstances that benefit her. Manipulation. But a man chooses to dissolve a prenup, chooses transparency, chooses to let someone else decide if they want to stay. That should be love. She looked at Adrian. I want to go public. I want to tell them that I was terrified. And I signed a prenup because I didn't trust my own judgment. And I took months to decide if I could trust Adrian's intentions. I want to tell them that I chose to tear up that document because I saw someone willing to be vulnerable. They'll crucify you both, Jennifer warned. They'll say you're complicit in his emotional manipulation. Maybe, Bella said calmly. But the alternative is letting someone who isn't even in our marriage dictate the narrative of our love. And I've spent enough of my life letting powerful men define my story. The interview aired on a Sunday evening. Adrian and Bella sat together in their penthouse, watching themselves on screen. It was raw and uncomfortable, and entirely honest. Bella talked about her fear. Adrian talked about his obsession, called it what it was, explained the exact moment he'd realized that loving someone meant giving them choice. Did you feel manipulated? The interviewer asked Bella directly. I felt terrified, Bella said. Not because he was forcing me into anything, but because I was choosing to believe him. And after years of guarding my heart, that's the scariest thing there is. Do you love him now? Bella looked at Adrian, and something real and private happened between them on live television. A moment of recognition, of absolute knowing. Yes, she said simply. Not because he's a billionaire, not because he orchestrated anything, but because he showed me that being known, really known, doesn't have to mean being controlled. The stock price rose 4.8% by Monday morning, but more importantly, Adrian's own people began reaching out. Board members, investors, people who'd been waiting to see if he'd crumble when challenged. The narrative shifted not because Adrian spun it perfectly, but because his willingness to be honest gave others permission to be honest too. Nathaniel Cross's campaign fizzled without the emotional drama it needed to sustain itself. That evening, Adrian took Bella to the rooftop, the place where he ran every morning, where the city spread out like a promise of possibility. "I want to thank you for not protecting me," he said quietly. "For refusing to let me hide behind the version of myself I thought was required. Someone once told me that love is choosing vulnerability anyway," Bella said. "I stole that from you." Adrian laughed, pulled her close, and kissed her under the sprawl of city lights. And Bella felt the full weight of their choice, not the forced circumstance, but the actual choice, settling into her bones, like something that would never let go. The Tokyo expansion was Adrian's biggest gamble in 5 years. He'd been planning the acquisition of a semiconductor company for 18 months, but the final negotiations required his physical presence. 3 weeks, 5 cities, high-stakes meetings conducted in languages. Adrian spoke with the precision of someone who'd learned them as tools rather than passions. He asked Bella to come with him. "I don't need a security blanket," she said, though they both knew that wasn't what this was. "Your team can handle everything. My team can handle the business." Adrian pulled her close, standing in their bedroom as dawn light crept across the walls. "I need you to handle me." Bella melted into him, she couldn't help it. The past months had made her soft toward him in ways she'd spent her entire adult life learning not to be. "I'll come," she agreed. "But you have to promise not to use me as a distraction. You're present for the meetings. You're fully there." "I will be," Adrian promised. "But I'll know you're in the hotel, and that will make the impossible parts easier." Tokyo hit them like a fever dream. The jet lag was devastating. Adrian pushed through it, with the kind of discipline that suggested he'd trained himself years ago, not to require things like sleep. Bella watched him move through 18-hour business days with methodical focus, wearing his power like a carefully tailored suit. The acquisition negotiations happened in conference rooms on the 43rd floor of a building that looked like a monument to capitalism. Adrian moved through the exchanges in fluent Japanese, pivoting with the grace of someone playing multiple games simultaneously. Bella attended some of the sessions, primarily to watch him work. It was, she discovered, the sexiest thing she'd ever seen, the way he commanded a room without raising his voice, the way his eyes would flick to her when he made a particularly strategic move, as if checking that she was watching. The casual brilliance of his mind, uncoiled and unrestricted. By day 4, tension was a living thing between them. Bella kept to their suite a luxury that was almost obscene, with a living area that opened onto a Tokyo skyline. She worked on editing a new documentary project, or tried to. Mostly she watched the light change across the city and thought about Adrian in dark conference rooms, making decisions worth billions of dollars, while probably thinking about her the way she was thinking about him. She absolutely was not doing that. She was a woman with her own work, her own focus, her own. Adrian came back on day 5, and his control was paper thin. "We need to celebrate," he said, loosening his tie as he entered the suite. The acquisition cleared final approval. "It's done." He was moving with barely restrained energy, like something was vibrating beneath his skin. "Congratulations," Bella said carefully. "That's incredible." "Come here," Adrian said, and she recognized the command embedded in the request. She crossed the space between them slowly, deliberately, watching him watch her. Up close, she could see the exhaustion under his eyes, the tension along his jaw, the barely contained need. "You were brilliant in those meetings," she said. "Every moment. The way you shifted strategy when you realized the Japanese partners needed different framing. It was perfect." Adrian's hand came up and cupped her face with surprising gentleness. "You watched me. I couldn't look away." She said it like a confession. His other hand found her waist, and he pulled her close enough that she could feel the rapid beating of his heart. "I've been going insane thinking about you 3 floors below while I was stuck in those rooms." "I know," Bella said softly. "I could feel it." "Is that a problem?" Adrian's voice was rough. "No," Bella whispered. "I think I've been waiting for this since the day I signed that prenup. I've been waiting for you to break." Adrian kissed her, then not tenderly. Not the careful kisses he'd been offering her, but with the full force of months of restraint finally surrendering. He kissed her like she was necessary, like she was oxygen, like the past week of control had been torturous, and he'd finally found relief. Bella kissed him back with equal desperation, her hands finding the buttons of his shirt, needing to feel skin, needing to confirm this was real, and not some elaborate fantasy brought on by jet lag and proximity. They broke apart, breathing hard. "I need you to be absolutely sure," Adrian said, his forehead against hers. "Because if we do this, I'm not going back to pretending we're anything less than completely essential to each other." I'm sure, Bella said. I've been sure since that morning you told me you loved me. Since before, probably. Since the moment I realized the prenup wasn't protecting me, it was protecting you. From being hurt if I didn't choose you. Adrian lifted her, and she wrapped her legs around him instinctively, as if her body had been waiting for this permission. He carried her to the bedroom, laying her down on sheets that probably cost more than most people's rent. What happened next was neither the cinematic explosion of chemistry nor the careful choreography of two people still learning each other. It was something between emotional and physical, necessary and profound. Adrian's hands traced her like he was reading a language only he could understand. His lips found the places where her pulse fluttered and lingered, breathing her in. Bella arched into him, needing to be closer, needing to confirm that this was actually happening and not some fever dream. She could feel his restraint, Adrian holding back, being careful with her, and she pulled away enough to meet his eyes. Don't, she said. Don't protect me. Not now. Not from this. Something shifted in his expression, a final surrendering of control. He kissed her again, deeper, more demanding, and Bella felt like she was falling and flying simultaneously. Her hands gripped his shoulders, his back, needing anchor points as sensation overwhelmed every thought. Later, lying in the darkness of their Tokyo hotel room, with Adrian's heartbeat beneath her ear and his arms around her, like he was terrified she might disappear, Bella felt something settle. Not completion exactly. That suggested an ending, but rather a beginning, the moment when theory became reality, when possibility became certainty. I love you, Adrian said into her hair. I need you to know that I'm fully aware of how irrational that might sound, and I don't care. Bella laughed softly. You're allowed to be irrational. You've earned it. Is that permission? Adrian pulled back to look at her, and in the city light bleeding through the windows, she could see his expression vulnerable and open in a way she'd never seen before. Yes, she said. That's permission. That's invitation. That's me choosing you, completely and irrevocably, with full knowledge of exactly who you are. Adrian kissed her again, softer this time, but with the kind of certainty that suggested he'd finally found something he didn't need to strategize or control, something that had chosen him back. They extended the Tokyo trip by a week. Adrian's team questioned it. Board members suggested he needed to return to San Francisco to manage the fallout and integration of the acquisition, but Adrian, for the first time in his career, declined to prioritize business over personal. He sent his chief operations officer to handle the details. That's not like you, his assistant said carefully over a video call. No, Adrian agreed, pulling Bella closer as they sat on the suite's terrace overlooking the neon-lit city. It's better. Tokyo became their bubble, a place where neither of them had to be anything except what they were. They explored neighborhoods like tourists, held hands on the Shibuya crossing, ate street food and expensive kaiseki, and drank sake in tiny bars where no one recognized the billionaire tech CEO. Adrian stopped wearing the armor of control quite so tightly. Bella discovered his sense of humor was sharper than she'd realized, that he could be silly when given permission, that he asked her questions about her work with genuine interest, rather than the polite interest of someone performing partnership. On their last evening, they went to a bathhouse, one of the old, traditional ones, and sat in steaming water, while the world outside remained chaos and demand. I'm afraid, Adrian said quietly, his head resting against the edge of the bath. Of what? Bella moved closer, the water lapping around them. That this will change when we go back. That the real world will make me revert to what I was before. That you'll see it happening and realize you made a mistake. Bella took his hand beneath the water. I didn't make a mistake, but I understand the fear. You've spent your entire life learning that showing softness is a liability. Breaking that conditioning takes more than 1 week in Tokyo. What if I can't do it? Adrian's voice was raw. What if I am fundamentally broken in ways that required someone buying me access to you, and I can never actually be healthy? Then we figure it out together, Bella said simply. We go to therapy. We fail sometimes. You fall back into patterns and we call you on it. We build something real, instead of something perfect. Adrian sat up and pulled her into his lap, water sloshing around them. He held her like he was terrified to let go. I'm going to mess this up, he said. I'm going to try to control situations and fall back into strategies instead of communication, and probably ignore your needs in favor of solving problems. Absolutely, Bella agreed. And I'm going to be defensive and push you away when things feel too vulnerable, and probably accuse you of ulterior motives when you're actually just trying to help. We're going to be messy and imperfect. How are you so certain about this? Adrian asked, pulling back to look at her. Because before this, I was certain about the exact opposite. I was certain we were fundamentally incompatible. And then you gave me a choice, and kept giving me choices. And somewhere between Tokyo and my fear and your walls finally coming down, I realized that certainty was the only thing I needed. Not about whether we'd be perfect, but about whether I was willing to try to be real with you. Adrian kissed her in that bathhouse, steam rising around them like incense. And Bella understood that this was the moment their marriage actually began. Not the civil ceremony, not the performance at galas, not even Tokyo, but in this moment when both of them chose to stop pretending they could control how love would shape them. The return to San Francisco was jarring. The Voss Holdings offices looked exactly the same, but Adrian moved through them differently. He scheduled a company-wide meeting and announced a structural shift in leadership. He was stepping back from day-to-day operations to focus on strategic vision and acquisitions. He was appointing Jennifer, his PR director, to the role of COO. He was, essentially, relinquishing control. The announcement shocked the company. Adrian had built his reputation on absolute command. I realized, he said in the meeting, with Bella sitting in the second row, that managing by fear is a strategy that works until you realize there's something worth more than the empire. I'm restructuring because I want to actually have time to build a life. Because I want to be the kind of man my wife can trust, not just respect. Stock went up 2.3%, but the personal cost was immediate. Adrian struggled in the space of not being needed for every decision. He came home edgy and uncertain, his hands shaking sometimes as he poured scotch, and tried to quiet the part of his brain that was used to constant strategic engagement. Bella watched him handle the transition with something between frustration and tenderness. He was trying. It was visible, this effort to be different, but trying and succeeding were different things. One evening, 3 weeks back in San Francisco, she found him in his home office at 2 a.m., reviewing reports he'd explicitly said he wasn't going to review anymore. You need to sleep, she said from the doorway. I'm managing a situation in the Seoul office, Adrian said without looking up. Jennifer can't handle it alone. Jennifer is the COO, Bella interrupted. She can handle it without you. Adrian finally looked at her, and she saw the panic beneath the control. What if she can't? What if I've destabilized the company by removing myself? Then you'll address it when it becomes necessary, Bella said carefully. Right now, you're anxious, and you're creating problems to solve, because that's what your brain learned to do to manage anxiety. Don't psychoanalyze me, Adrian said sharply. I'm not. I'm asking you to put the reports down and come to bed. Bella kept her voice level. I'm asking you to sit with the discomfort of not being needed for 8 hours. Adrian's jaw clenched. She could see him fighting the impulse to argue, to explain why this was necessary, to convince her that his fear was justified. Fine, he said curtly, closing his laptop. They went to bed in heavy silence. Adrian lay rigid beside her, clearly vibrating with the effort of not returning to his office. Bella didn't try to comfort him. Sometimes the kindest thing was to let someone sit with their own shit. Around 4 a.m., Adrian rolled toward her. I hate this, he said quietly. I hate not being in control. I hate that you can see through me. I hate that I'm lying here absolutely terrified that you're going to decide this is too much work. I know, Bella said softly. Do you want to go back to the office? Yes. Then go, she said. But not because you need to. Go because you need to learn that you can choose something without it being a necessity. Go because you need to prove to yourself that sitting with discomfort for 4 hours doesn't actually kill you. But maybe it should be 4 hours, not forever. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. Then he got out of bed and went back to his office. But this time, Bella went with him. They sat in the leather chairs, and Bella worked on her documentary editing while Adrian reorganized his inbox and handled emails. It wasn't solving the company problem. It was him learning to be anxious without needing to strategically manage it away. At 6 a.m., they returned to bed as dawn was breaking. Adrian held Bella like she was the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly become uncertain. Thank you, he said, for not letting me hide. That's marriage, Bella said simply. Not protecting each other from the hard parts. Facing them together. The prenup violation discovery came 3 months after they'd returned from Tokyo. Adrian's lawyer called him personally, which was never a good sign. Bella watched Adrian's expression shift from calm to something carved from stone as he listened, ending the call with a single word. Thank you. What happened? She asked. The original prenup had a clause we missed. A technical one, written in deliberately dense language. It stipulated that if either party initiated dissolution of the agreement, the other party retained the right to a financial audit of the dissolving party's assets. Adrian rubbed his face. I dissolved the prenup without the audit. Legally, that means the original agreement is still technically binding in certain contexts. What does that mean practically? Bella felt her chest tighten. It means Nathaniel Cross's lawyers have found a legal foothold to challenge everything about our marriage. They're arguing that the dissolution was invalid, which makes our current marital status questionable. They're pushing for a forensic financial audit of my assets during the time the original prenup was in effect. They're trying to unwind the entire relationship on legal grounds. Bella sat down slowly. This is a bluff. He's using every tool available, Adrian said flatly, including legal ones, and he has a point. I was careless. I assumed that choosing to undo something legally binding meant it was actually undone. It wasn't. They sat in heavy silence. What do we do? Bella asked finally. We fight it. My lawyers will argue that the spirit of the law supports the dissolution, that filing without the audit was a technical oversight, not a malicious act, and we probably win, but it's going to be ugly. It's going to take months. And the whole time, the media will be dissecting whether our marriage is even legally valid. What if they win? Bella whispered. What if you're right, and the marriage is technically invalid? Adrian's eyes came to hers. Then we get married again. Properly, without any of this baggage. That's not how this works, Bella said, her voice shaking. Even if we get married again, it doesn't erase the fact that I married you when you used my family's crisis as leverage. It doesn't erase the manipulation. All it does is prove that I'm willing to stay despite knowing exactly who you are and what you did. Yes, Adrian said simply. It does prove that. And I think that's worth proving. But only if you actually want to. Bella stood and walked to the window, needing distance from his certainty. I don't know if I want to anymore. This was supposed to be us choosing each other freely, without the complications. And instead, we're embroiled in a legal challenge that turns our entire relationship into a transaction again. The legal challenge doesn't change what's real between us, Adrian said quietly behind her. Doesn't it? Bella turned to face him. Every conversation we have now, people will wonder if I'm saying it because I love you, or because I'm protecting my legal investment. Every time we work through something, there will be speculation about whether it's real or strategic. We're back to being a story for people to scrutinize. We were always going to be that, Adrian said. The moment I inherited this empire, the moment I married you, the moment we went public with our feelings, we surrendered the ability to be private. The only thing we can control is whether we stay true to each other regardless. That's easy for you to say, Bella said sharply. You're the billionaire. You got what you wanted. I'm the woman who married for leverage, and has to spend the rest of her life proving she didn't. Adrian flinched like she'd struck him. That's not what happened. Isn't it? At what point does it become what happened, Adrian? When does the original intent stop defining everything? Bella could feel tears threatening and push them down. I came into this marriage scared that I was the leverage in someone else's game. I chose to believe you when you said it was more. But the courts are about to argue that the original framework was never actually dissolved, which means technically I was always the leverage. No, Adrian said, moving toward her. That's not. Don't. Bella held up her hand. Don't try to convince me. I need to sit with this. I need to figure out if what I feel for you survives the reality of what you actually did, not the narrative we've built around it. She left for her office that evening. She told herself it was to work on her documentary. The truth was, she needed to remember that she was someone separate from Adrian's story. Someone with her own career, her own identity, her own value, that didn't depend on whether a billionaire had engineered circumstances to meet her. The legal battle raged for 6 weeks. Adrian's lawyers mounted a comprehensive defense. They argued that the prenup's dissolution clause was unconscionable, that Nathaniel Cross was using legal technicality as harassment, that the spirit of the agreement had been honored, even if the technical procedure hadn't. But every day the battle continued was a day Bella watched Adrian revert to the controlled, strategic version of himself. The man who'd learned to survive by calculating outcomes and managing variables. He was trying to stay present with her, but she could feel him retreating, protecting himself. And she realized with horrifying clarity that they were both doing the same thing. They were both defending against the possibility that the other might leave. They were both using strategic distance as protection. One evening, finding Adrian alone in his home office, because of course he was Bella, made a decision. "I need to tell you something," she said, sitting on the edge of his desk. "And I need you to hear it without trying to fix it or explain it, or strategically manage my emotions." Adrian set down his laptop immediately. "Okay, I'm terrified," Bella said quietly. "I'm terrified that the courts are going to declare our marriage invalid, and that feeling will become proof that I was right to be skeptical from the beginning. But I'm also terrified of something worse." "What?" Adrian asked gently. "I'm terrified that I'll stay with you even if they do declare it invalid. I'm terrified that no matter what the courts say, I've already chosen you, and that choice feels irreversible now. And it scares me because that means I don't have an escape route anymore." Adrian stood and pulled her into his arms. "You're not trapped, aren't I?" Bella leaned into him anyway. "We're both trapped, I think. We're trapped by the fact that we chose each other despite everything, and that choice is now the heaviest thing either of us is carrying." "Is that a bad thing?" Adrian asked quietly. "I don't know yet," Bella said honestly. "Ask me when the legal battle is over. Ask me when we know whether this is actually marriage or just a very elaborate transaction. Ask me when I figure out if I can love you without wondering if I should hate you." Adrian held her tighter, and Bella realized that this was the actual test, not the initial choice, not Tokyo, not the dissolution of the prenup, but this being willing to sit in the discomfort of not knowing and choosing each other anyway. The court ruled in their favor 2 weeks later. The prenup dissolution was validated. Their marriage was legally sound. And Bella realized that the ruling didn't actually change anything. Not really. Because the question that had been haunting her wasn't whether the court would agree they were married. It was whether she could survive knowing exactly who Adrian was and choosing him anyway. The scandal broke on a Tuesday morning, and it was catastrophic. Adrian's CFO, his closest associate, a man Adrian had mentored for 12 years, had been embezzling millions of dollars, funneled through shell companies, hidden in subsidiary accounting, and he'd done it with Adrian's signature on key documents, either forged or obtained through deliberate obfuscation of detail. The news cycle exploded. Voss, empire in turmoil. Billionaire CEO, either criminally negligent or criminally complicit. "We're going to weather this," Adrian said, but his voice was hollow. "My lawyers say we have a clear defense. The forged documents are obvious. The CFO has been arrested. This doesn't touch me legally, but it touches you," Bella said quietly, watching him from across their penthouse. He hadn't slept. His hand was shaking as he held coffee. "You trusted someone. You gave them access and authority. You didn't see it." "No," Adrian said flatly. "I didn't. Which means I'm either a poor judge of character or so focused on my own agenda that I missed a betrayal happening in my own company." The board called an emergency meeting. Adrian attended, and Bella watched the news reports show him walking into the building controlled, impeccable, the facade in perfect place. But she could see the crack in his expression, the moment before the cameras started rolling when something like fear flickered across his face. The board demanded his resignation, pending investigation. It was a standard move: protect the company, manage optics, let the CEO become the scapegoat, while the organization preserved itself. Adrian came home and showered for an hour, like he could wash away culpability with hot water and expensive soap. "I stepped down," he said when he emerged, towel around his waist, skin still steaming. "They demanded it?" Bella asked. "They suggested strongly." I agreed. "It's the right move strategically." He looked at her. "The company will survive better without me as a distraction." There was something terrifying in his resignation, not about the resignation itself, but about the way he'd framed it. Strategic. Controlled. The problem-solving version of Adrian that emerged when he was genuinely terrified. "What do you need?" Bella asked carefully. "I need to not talk about this," Adrian said. "I need to not strategize or plan or figure out how to navigate the fallout. I need to just exist for a while without being the architect of solutions." But he didn't exist. He researched. He reviewed documents with his lawyers. He read every article written about his negligence, his blindness, his failure as a leader. He turned the CFO's betrayal into something he'd caused through his own oversight. By day 3, he was barely leaving his office. By day 5, Bella made a decision. She packed a bag and left. She didn't leave a note. She didn't explain. She simply went to her parents' house and, when Adrian called repeatedly, she didn't answer. When he came to the door demanding to speak with her, she stayed in her childhood bedroom and let her father turn him away. Her mother, concerned and pragmatic, brought her tea. "What happened?" she asked. He's disappearing, Bella said. He's turning this crisis into proof that he's fundamentally flawed. And he's spiraling, and I can't stop him. And I can't watch him destroy himself while I pretend that's love. Is it not? Her mother asked gently. Love is a lot of things, Bella said. But it's not staying present while someone punishes themselves for being human. It's not sacrificing your own stability to absorb someone else's self-destruction. She stayed away for a week. Adrian didn't contact her family again. He didn't show up at her office. Instead, according to her father, he went to the investigation himself and forced the board to acknowledge that the CFO had deliberately circumvented safety protocols, that the embezzlement was sophisticated enough to fool the best accountants in the industry, that Adrian bore responsibility for oversight but not culpability for crime. He cooperated fully with law enforcement. He waived privilege on internal communications. He submitted to the investigation with the kind of transparency that cost him politically, but proved his integrity. And then, on day 9, he called her. I know why you left, Adrian said without preamble. I was catastrophizing. I was turning your crisis into a story about my incompetence, and I was going to pull you down with me because that's what I do. I create gravity wells that pull everything toward the center. Yes, Bella said quietly. You were. I went to therapy, Adrian continued. 6 sessions in 6 days. I'm not fixed. But I'm aware, and I'm trying, and I'm asking you, begging you to come home. Not for me, for us. Because I think we can survive this if we're actually in the same room. Bella was quiet for a long moment. I need you to understand something. I can't be the person who keeps you grounded. I can't be your life raft. We both have to want to stay afloat. I know, Adrian said, and I do. I want to stay afloat. I want to build something with you that survives, not just the easy parts, but the actual catastrophe. Then come get me, Bella said. And we figure out what that looks like together. Adrian arrived at her parents' house in the late afternoon. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, but there was something different in his posture, less control, more presence. Her parents made themselves scarce with the grace of people who understood their child needed privacy. I'm sorry, Adrian said immediately when they were alone. Not just for the crisis, for everything before it, for letting fear make me retreat when I should have been reaching toward you. I'm sorry too, Bella said, for leaving without explanation, for assuming I knew what you needed better than you did. Adrian crossed the room and pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. I'm terrified of losing you. I know, Bella whispered. But you won't lose me because of failure or crisis or scandal. You might lose me if you stop trying. That's the only way out. They stood like that, holding each other in her parents' living room, both of them, understanding that they'd just survived the thing that broke most relationships, the collision between who they'd promised to be and who they actually were when catastrophe arrived. And they were still choosing each other. The public redemption arc was almost too clean. Within 4 weeks, Adrian had become the gold standard for corporate responsibility. His cooperation with the investigation, his acceptance of responsibility for oversight failures, his decision to restructure the entire company's internal controls and implement external auditing. Business schools started studying his response as a case study in crisis management and accountability. But privately, Adrian was learning to grieve something he'd lost: the belief that he could engineer his way out of human complexity. He was rebuilding the company under new leadership, but differently. He actually delegated. He actually trusted. He actually checked in with people just to see how they were, instead of analyzing their utility to his objectives. And he was rebuilding his marriage, which felt simultaneously harder and more important. I need to ask you something, Adrian said one evening, 6 months after the crisis had peaked. They were on the rooftop, overlooking the city, the place where he'd run every morning for years, and where they'd stood countless times before. Okay, Bella said cautiously. Do you want to have children? Adrian asked. The question was so far from what she'd expected that Bella laughed. Where is this coming from? I've spent my entire life building legacy, Adrian said quietly, trying to exceed my father's empire, prove my worth through accumulation. And I realized I never actually considered what legacy I'd want to leave beyond money and success. And then I met you, and it occurred to me that maybe legacy is smaller than that. Maybe it's just a person. Shared DNA, a continuation of something that matters. Bella felt her heart do something complicated. That's very sentimental for you. I'm trying to be human, Adrian said. Give me some credit. Do you actually want children? She asked gently. Or is this you trying to show me that you've changed? Because you don't have to prove that anymore. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. I think I do want them. Not as proof or legacy or achievement, but because the idea of having children with you, specifically children that would have your determination and my analytical ability, and both of our capacity to love deeply, that appeals to me. That's a terrible reason to have children, Bella said softly. And also, the most honest you've ever been about anything. So that's a no? Adrian asked. That's an I'll think about it, Bella said. And maybe in a few years, when we've actually proven that we can sustain this without crisis management every 6 months, we'll revisit it. Adrian pulled her close. When did you become the stable one? About the same time you became the vulnerable one, Bella said. I think we flipped roles somewhere between Tokyo and the CFO scandal. They stood together as the sun descended toward the horizon, and Bella thought about how strange this was, how they'd started as a transaction, and arrived at something like partnership, not because the initial circumstances had redeemed themselves, but because they'd both chosen, repeatedly, to be different. The wedding, the real one, the one that mattered, happened a year after Adrian had resigned from the board. They didn't invite media. They didn't perform for society pages. They invited family and the small circle of people who'd actually witnessed their relationship evolve from transaction to truth. Bella wore simple white silk, no extravagance. Adrian wore a suit in charcoal gray, his signature color, the one that made his eyes look like storm clouds. When they exchanged vows, Bella wrote her own. I choose you, she said clearly. Not because of who you were or who you were trying to be, but because of who you're becoming. I choose you in your vulnerability and your strength. I choose you in the parts that terrify me and the parts that make me feel safe. I choose you knowing that we'll probably fail sometimes, and I choose you anyway. Adrian's vows were shorter. I love you more than I love control. I love you more than I love certainty. I love you enough to keep trying even when trying is harder than the original sin of orchestrating this entire arrangement was. And I will spend the rest of my life proving that your choice in me was not a mistake. The kiss that sealed it was nothing like the first one, not restrained, not performance. It was full and open, and absolutely certain. That evening, in a luxury suite at the hotel next to where they were having their reception, Adrian made love to Bella with a tenderness that suggested he'd learned something about vulnerability that went beyond performance. Tell me if I hurt you, he said. And Bella realized he was terrified not of failure in the physical sense, but of inadvertently causing harm. You won't, she promised. But if you do, I'll tell you. That's what this is, actual honesty. It was slow and intimate and deliberately unhurried in a way that seemed to heal something in both of them. Not healing the original wound, the orchestration, the leverage, the transaction, but moving past it, accepting it as part of their history and choosing to build something new on top of that foundation anyway. Afterward, lying in darkness with Adrian's arms around her and his heartbeat beneath her ear, Bella felt something settle into permanence. I'm scared, Adrian whispered. Of what? She asked. That I'll wake up tomorrow and realize this was all a fever dream. That you'll be gone, and I'll be back to being the person I was before the man who thought love was something you could engineer. Bella sat up, forcing him to meet her eyes. You can't engineer it, but you can choose it, every day. And I'll choose it too. But you have to understand that our love isn't special because it's perfect. It's special because we chose it despite the perfect reason not to. Adrian pulled her close again. Then I choose you tomorrow, and the day after, and every day after that. Good, Bella said, because I choose you too. 2 years later, the documentary aired. Bella's project, the one she'd been working on since the beginning of her marriage to Adrian, was a feature-length study of power, leverage, and love in high-stakes relationships. She'd interviewed business leaders, their spouses, therapists, and experts in relationship dynamics. She'd created something honest and complex and occasionally brutal in its assessment of how wealth distorts intimacy. The last interview in the film was Adrian. He sat in their living room, early morning light streaming across his face, and talked about his father, about learning that love was a transaction, about believing that control was the same as safety, about the moment he realized he'd become exactly the kind of man his father had been, strategic in everything, vulnerable in nothing. I married her to solve a problem, Adrian said clearly on camera. My problem, her family's problem, the problem of my loneliness, which I'd convinced myself could be solved by acquiring the right woman, and I was willing to use her desperation to make that acquisition happen. The interviewer, who wasn't Bella, but another journalist she'd hired specifically to maintain objectivity, asked, Do you regret it? Adrian was quiet for a long moment. I regret the circumstance and the method. I regret that her family needed the kind of leverage I could provide. I regret the prenup and the manipulation and the deliberate orchestration. What I don't regret is her. I don't regret the person who forced me to become human again. The documentary premiered at Sundance to critical acclaim. It won Best Feature Documentary. More importantly, it started conversations about consent in relationships, about how trauma shapes our capacity for love, about the responsibility wealthy people have not to weaponize their wealth in pursuit of intimacy. Adrian watched it beside her, and Bella felt him tense during his own interview. Too honest? She asked. Not enough, Adrian said, but sufficient. The letter came 3 weeks after the premiere. Adrian's mother, who'd never fully warmed to Bella, but had learned to respect her, was dying. Not suddenly, but with the kind of certainty that comes from a diagnosis and a timeline. She wanted to see him. Adrian flew to the coast with Bella, and they sat in the large house where he'd grown up, in the room where his father had died, watching his mother diminish. She softened, his mother said, looking at Bella. I didn't think she would. I thought you'd destroy her, or she'd destroy you. And instead, you both learned to be something different. We learned to stop being what other people needed us to be, Bella said gently. Adrian's mother reached for his hand. I'm sorry for your father. I'm sorry for what he taught you about love. I'm sorry I didn't protect you from that. She paused, breathing shallowly. But I'm not sorry you married her. She's the best thing you ever orchestrated, even though that's not what you were trying to do. Adrian held his mother while she slept, and Bella sat beside him in the darkness, bearing witness. A month later, Adrian resigned completely from the business world. Not because of his mother's death, though that accelerated the timeline, but because he'd realized he didn't want to be a billionaire anymore. He wanted to be something smaller, quieter, more real. He sold his company to a consortium of his former employees, structured the deal so that they maintained agency and ownership, ensured that his departure didn't destabilize the organization. He kept enough wealth to live comfortably, but liquidated the rest into a foundation dedicated to supporting emerging entrepreneurs, specifically those from communities that traditional venture capital overlooked. This is insane, his former COO Jennifer told him. You're walking away from billions. Yes, Adrian agreed. And it's the smartest thing I've ever done. What they did with their newfound freedom was unexpectedly ordinary. They bought a house, not a mansion, but a large, beautiful place in Marin County, with a garden and old wooden floors and windows that let in actual sunlight. Adrian renovated it with his own hands, learning carpentry and plumbing from YouTube tutorials. He was terrible at it, and Bella laughed at his incompetence, and he laughed too, which seemed revolutionary. Bella expanded her documentary work, using Adrian's foundation to fund projects that mainstream media overlooked. They traveled. They built relationships with people who had nothing to do with wealth or power or strategic value. Adrian learned to cook, badly. Bella learned to sit still, which she'd never done. They fought sometimes. Adrian still reverted to control when he was anxious. Bella still withdrew when things felt too vulnerable. But they had the tools now: therapy, communication, willingness to fail. 3 years after their real wedding, Bella discovered she was pregnant. Are you sure? Adrian asked, holding the test like it was made of spun glass. Fairly sure, Bella said. That's what the stick with 2 lines suggests. Adrian sank to the bathroom floor, and Bella thought he might break. Instead, he laughed, a sound of pure, uncomplicated joy that she'd never heard from him before. We're having a baby, he said, like he couldn't quite believe it. We are, Bella confirmed, sitting beside him on the bathroom tile. I'm terrified, Adrian said immediately. Good, Bella said. That means you understand what responsibility actually is. The child, a daughter, with Adrian's gray eyes and Bella's stubbornness, was born on a winter morning that felt like a blessing. Adrian was there, holding Bella's hand, crying openly, fully present in a way he'd never been before. They named her Eleanor, after Adrian's mother. Bella watched Adrian hold their daughter with a gentleness that suggested he'd healed something deeper than she'd realized. When Eleanor wrapped her tiny hand around Adrian's finger, he looked at Bella like she'd given him something bigger than biology. She looks like you, Bella said. She looks like both of us, Adrian corrected. She's going to be herself, and that's the entire point. On Eleanor's first birthday, Adrian and Bella renewed their vows. Not because they needed to, they'd long since moved past the point of needing external validation of their commitment, but because they wanted to, because Eleanor would eventually ask about the moment they became official, because sometimes rituals matter, They stood in their backyard, with Eleanor reaching for both their hands, and they promised each other again. Different promises this time, not the grand gestures or the redemption arcs, but the small ones. "I promise to see you," Adrian said. "Not the version of you I imagined or the version I needed, but the actual, complicated, fully human version that you are. I promise to stay," Bella said. "Even when it's hard. Even when we're both failing. I promise to stay and fight for us, and believe that we're worth fighting for." Eleanor babbled something that sounded vaguely like approval, and they both laughed. Later, after Eleanor was asleep and the house had settled into quiet, Bella and Adrian sat on their porch, watching the sun descend toward the horizon. "Do you ever regret it?" Adrian asked. "The original circumstance? The prenup? Any of it?" Bella considered the question seriously. "I regret the fear I felt. I regret the months I spent questioning my own judgment. I regret the media circus and the legal battles and the years spent explaining ourselves to people who'd already made up their minds about what our relationship meant." She paused. "But if I could go back and change the circumstance, knowing what I know now, I wouldn't. Because this us, Eleanor, the life we actually have, instead of the life I imagined I wanted, this is better than anything I could have planned." "Even though I used leverage to get you?" Adrian asked quietly. "Because you had the self-awareness to eventually recognize it and choose differently," Bella said. "Because you were willing to be wrong and to change. Because you taught me that love isn't something that happens to you, it's something you keep choosing. Over and over." Adrian pulled her close, and they sat like that as darkness fell around them. Two people who'd started with a contract and ended up with a life. Not a perfect life, but a real one, and that, it turned out, was infinitely better. Eleanor slept in the room above them, safe and loved and entirely irreplaceable. The story of how they got there would always be complicated, but the story of what they built from there, that was simple. It was love, chosen deliberately, renewed daily, earned through effort and vulnerability, and the willingness to keep trying even when trying was harder than the original sin that brought them together. It was home,